So, in order to explain how lift is produced, we must first ask the question, what is lift? Well, using the FAA's definition, there are two parts to this answer that we need to know, and they are, firstly, lift is a force produced by the dynamic effect of the air acting on an airfoil, and secondly, lift acts perpendicular to the flight path and the lateral axis, as well as through the centre of lift. So, what does this all really mean when we think of lift? Well, it means that if there is no air, lift can't be created, and also, if a plane is in level flight, the direction of lift will act directly opposite the force of weight. So now that we know what lift is, it's time to find out how lift can be produced. For an airplane, the predominant structure that produces lift is the airfoil. As you can see, the distinct shape of this airfoil consists of a curved upper surface called the upper camber and a relatively flat lower surface called the lower camber. The reason for this shape is to maximise the physical effects of colliding air particles and differential pressure on the wing. These effects are what allow the airfoil to produce lift. So, let's explain how these physical concepts produce lift. Each theory is explained using the work of Isaac Newton and Daniel Bernoulli respectively, but for now, we'll start with the collision of air particles on an airfoil, which can be explained using Newton's basic laws of motion. We'll demonstrate this using a simple experiment. By imitating an inclined airfoil with a block of wood, we can demonstrate how Newton's laws can explain lift on an airfoil's lower camber. We'll then accelerate a ball, which will imitate an air molecule, towards this block. Newton's third law of motion is vital for the explanation of what happens next. It simply states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So, when the ball collides with the block, it exerts a force on it, causing the block to accelerate away. But as we now know, an equal but opposite force is applied by the block of wood on the ball also. This results in the ball also accelerating away from the point of collision. By revisualizing this process taking place on an airfoil with much more air molecules, we can see that this process results in the creation of both lift and drag on the airfoil. But this isn't the only component of lift that can be explained by Newton's laws. As millions of air molecules are deflected upwards over the upper camber of the airfoil, they are then guided over the airfoil because of the Coanda effect, the phenomenon in which a fluid attaches itself to a nearby surface. The resulting downward flow of air molecules is called a downwash, and as a change in direction causes a force is applied on the airfoil. So as we know, Newton's third law comes into conformance once again. The force of the downwash causes an equal but opposite force on the airfoil, and another component of lift is generated. We can also explain lift using Bernoulli's principle of differential pressure. It simply states that as the velocity of a moving fluid increases, the pressure within the fluid decreases. So, when an airflow passes under an inclined airfoil, it is deflected downwards. This action exerts pressure on the incoming airflow as the air passing underneath is slowed down. The airflow's velocity decreases rapidly as it meets the airfoil, but there is one point in particular where the pressure exerted is strongest and the velocity is virtually stopped. This is called the stagnation point. After this point, the velocity then proceeds to increase again as it approaches the trailing edge. However, in conformance with Bernoulli's principle, this results in a gradient of high to low air pressure below the airfoil, and as pressure is just a force applied in a perpendicular direction, we can again use Newton's third law of motion to show that an aerodynamic force is created. This bubble acts upward on the airfoil, causing an acceleration upwards, and therefore a component of this force is lift. But lift is also produced on the upper camber. As the airflow approaching the upper camber is deflected upwards, it is then forced back down the camber. This is because of the Coanda effect, which, as we already know, explains why a fluid follows the contour of a nearby surface. But it's the shape of the upper camber that really causes the creation of lift. As the fluid of air accelerates through a curve, the air's inertial resistance to this acceleration causes the formation of a bubble of low air pressure. Thus, as the airfoil experiences an area of upward pressure, the airfoil is essentially sucked upwards. Altogether, this shows that Bernoulli's principle can also validly explain how lift can be created on an airfoil. Finally, let's head back to the drawing board to find out about the other factors that affect lift. There's an equation for this, which uses 4 variables to determine the lifting force of an airfoil. They are the coefficient of lift, the air density, the airfoil velocity, and the surface area of the wing. Starting with the air density, what this equation tells us is that the more dense the air, the greater the lifting performance. This is because high air density has more air molecules and therefore more collisions with the wing. A higher airfoil velocity will result in more airflow passing over the wing per second, and more air molecules striking the surface per second. So, unsurprisingly, it is vital for lift. Thirdly, the bigger the surface of the wing, the more air molecules that can strike it at any one time. And finally, each airfoil has a unique coefficient of lift. This is the value that takes the airfoil's shape and inclination into account when calculating the force of lift. So that's the basics of lift. My name is Connor, and I hope this video helps you with your future pilot training.